Today's message, study, is entitled, They Followed a Star. I guess the first question is, who are they? Yes, the wise guys. Yeah, they were like mafia people, right? No. So we're going to talk about, because you stop and think, these men came from Persia or beyond. Some traditions say that they came all the way from, one came from China, one came from Africa, one came from Persia. And of course, I don't know. I think they came from Persia. Still, I think it's like 700 miles to make this journey. It wasn't something they did like, well, yeah, let's just take the 9 o'clock train and let's go. You know, you had a lot of people, I'm sure, besides the wise men, they had people who packed for them. They might have taken their wives with them to cook for them, or someone. I don't think they were kings, we'll talk about that, but someone had to make their dinner, right? So they had an entourage. So what was it that they saw that compelled them to go, to make that journey? Okay? So the first thing we need to think about, and we read the passage, we're going to reread it a little bit as we go later. So that's the same passage that we read. So if you want to hang on to that piece of paper, you can use it to refer to the verses, or you can open your Bible if you have it. Or most of the chairs have a Bible underneath a seat in front of you, and you can use that. It's going to be from Matthew chapter 2, primarily verses 1 to 11. I say A because the end of 11 doesn't really have any significance about our topic. But we're going to talk about these wise guys, these Magi. But the first thing we need to consider are the signs in the sky. The signs in the sky. Did you know there were signs in the sky? You know, of course, when you're driving along and you see a stop sign hanging above the street, that seems like a sign in the sky, right? A little bit different, but we're going to talk about these signs. What are they? What were they? Okay? So, in our discussion, let me get this arrow out of the way. Maybe later we'll use it, but not right now. Signs in the sky. So the first thing we need to do is make a distinction between astronomy and astrology. Okay, that's important. In our world, I mean, when I was a kid, you know, every day in the newspaper, the horoscope says, you know, there'd be like a little blurb, a little section every day. And they probably still do in many papers. Well, if there are any papers, I think it's all online now. And so there was a horoscope, and there was a big desire to understand what's going on, signs. You know, or, you know, if you were at school, hey, what's your sign? I'm a Gemini, by the way, but I don't put any stock in it. So, what's the difference between astronomy and astrology? They both have the same root word, astro. Astro is where we get it's from a Greek word meaning star. Okay? So astronomy, the nami at the end, is telling you about naming or understanding the stars. Theology and astrology is a study of the stars. So they both kind of say the same thing, but they're not the same. Okay? The idea of astronomy is to study the stars, to look at them, to gain knowledge and insight, you know, kind of like NASA or somebody like that, to use that for, like if you're going to the moon, for example, wouldn't you need to know about where things are and what's going on, how they orbit and all that stuff? So that's studying that. I believe that is glorifying to God because God is the creator. So when we study his creation, it should bring us to a place where we are able to worship him in a correct way, a true way. But astrology, if you're not understanding astrology, they believe that the movements of the stars and the planets control your destiny. Not true. It's like, oh, today, Jupiter and whatever is in the seventh house and, whatever. Remember that song? I didn't want to play it because it's a copyright issue, but, the whole thing about signs and stars and everything. And so we get hung up on that. And bottom line is, people who are astrologers are trying to look at the movement of the stars and tell you like a fortune cookie what your life is going to be like. And in a sense, control your life. That you owe who you are and whatever sign or whatever you're under. I remember that song was a musical, Paint Your Wagon. I was born under a wandering star, whatever. So let's make that distinction, that astronomy studies the stars in an attempt to appreciate God's greatness. And ignore science and stuff like that. But astrology is you're basically worshiping the stars. And we'll know, Pastor Jonah has been teaching that studying of those kinds of things is worshiping fallen angels and demons. Bottom line. So people who are into astrology are demonically obsessed. Not necessarily possessed, but obsessed. Okay? So let's look at a verse. Deuteronomy 17, verses 2 to 5. This is what the penalty was in the old days. Of course, we don't do this today because we don't take people out and kill them because of this. But anyway, this is what God said. This is God speaking. If there is found among you within any of your gates, which the Lord your God gives you, a man or a woman who has been wicked in the sight of the Lord your God, in transgressing his covenant meaning what he told us to observe, the law, the contract, who has gone and served other gods. So we're not supposed to serve other gods, okay? And worshipped them. Either the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven. You get that he's saying that you're worshiping these foreign gods when you worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay? So, what happens to a man or a woman who does this? Worshiping the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it is told you, even if you just hear about it. Like Mordecai over there, he's worshiping the stars. Oh, let's go get him. Okay? And you hear of it, by seeing them out on their rooftop worshiping or not, you hear about it. Then you shall inquire diligently. Check it. Go ask them. Study. Cross-examine them, so to speak. And if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination, here God uses the word abomination. This is more than just a sin. This is like a gross sin. Heinous. Unbelievable. Abomination has been committed in Israel. Then this is what you're supposed to do. You shall bring out to your gates that man or woman who has committed that wicked thing, and shall stone to death that man or woman with stones. God was serious. If you're going to worship the astrological signs and the moon and the stars and the sun, you deserve death. Okay, that's harsh. But that was what God said. Okay? So, worshiping the heavenly host, as I said, the heavenly host, we say that a lot, and usually when we see the appearance of the angels and the heavenly host, we understand that the heavenly host is angelic beings. It's not just the actual points of light. There are beings that are out there that are associated with those worlds. I don't know exactly in what way. I know that Satan has superintended the earth. And so when God created man and put man on the earth and gave him dominion over the earth, Satan didn't like it, so he came and he tricked man and got the right to the world back. Because the Bible calls him the God of this world, the prince of the power of the air, and these various phrases. Little g God, yes, as Jonah would say. In other words, you can call anything a God, but is it? No. There's only one God, the Bible says. Okay? One big G God. Okay? So, the worship of the heavenly host, look at this here. And take heed, Deuteronomy 4:19, lest you lift your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven. Okay, so he's grouping the sun, moon, and stars as the host of heaven. You feel driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord your God has given to all the peoples under the whole heaven as a heritage. So he says, take heed. In other words, pay attention. Warning, don't do this. Don't worship these. Okay? There's a beautiful picture, just a little picture of what it's like out there. And you see the clouds of dust and stuff, and you see the various lights. And all those little points of light that we think are stars, they're galaxies. There's an incredible amount of galaxies. Okay? So here's a distinction that we need to make. That the stars, it's like a thermometer. You know what a thermometer is, right? You got a fever and you put the thermometer in your mouth. Does the thermometer give you the fever? Make you hot? Or does it indicate how hot it is? So the stars for us are like a thermometer. In other words, they can, by studying them and looking at them, we can understand, and they give us signs and information, but they don't make us hot or cold or do anything to us. Okay, they're not what we'd call an active agent. Active agents are something that causes it. So, is studying the stars astrology? No. Not if you don't make it something that affects you in what you believe and how you act and respond. And there's basically worship. So the stars don't do that. But Satan likes to twist everything, and so he makes people do that. So they're indicators. The stars are indicators. Okay? Study of the cosmos actually brings glory to God. Let's look at a couple of verses here. Psalm 8, words of David. He says, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Your glory. We'll talk about glory here in a minute. Okay? So he's looking at, so back in those days, they didn't have light pollution, smog and all that stuff, so they could look up at night, every night if it wasn't cloudy or overcast, and they could see the stars. And David said, hey, looked at the stars, and they declare the glory. We're going to look at that verse, Psalm 19 here in a minute. You have set your glory above the heavens. In verse 3 and 4, when I consider your heavens, David speaking, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? In other words, how insignificant am I compared to that vastness of space? And we're going to talk about that. This is going to blow your mind in a minute. I'm trying to keep you entertained here, or engaged, I should say. So let's look at the fact that God actually takes credit for creation. In other words, it didn't just happen. It's not a big bang. It's not an explosion. It's not all matter compressed into the size of a dot on a page that just got suddenly exploded. Where did the matter come from? How did it get compressed? Where did the space come that matter fills? These scientists don't explain any of that. And now some of them are trying to say that the Big Bang has happened many times. In other words, things expands and then they contract over billions and billions of years, and then they get compressed again, and then they explode, and then they come back. So God takes credit. Okay? God created the heavens and the earth. It says in Genesis 1, verse 1. In other words, the very first verse of the Bible. What does God say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Period. There's not a lot of extrapolation there because it's everything. Everything apart from God, He created. He didn't create Himself. He's always existed. Okay? And there was no time, space, nothing. Matter. He created it all from nothing, it says. Okay? Let's look at some other ideas here. Verses. Job 9. Many of you probably realize that Job is probably the oldest book of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Deuteronomy deal with things probably before, but they were written many years after by Moses, probably around the year 1500 BC. Job was probably sometime between the flood and the time of Abraham, somewhere around the year 2500, 2300. Scholars are not sure. So Job lived, and so these things were recorded. And in the very first or oldest book, I should say, of the Bible, God's talking about stars, and Job's talking about stars. Let's look at it. Concerning God, he says, He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He made the bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. Does everybody know what the bear, Orion, and the Pleiades are? They are constellations. Yes, we're going to look at, actually, I'm going to give you a picture of each one of them. Not the chambers of the south. Okay? So, and then a little bit later, now God responds. And if you've ever read the book of Job, it's not exactly the easiest read, because Job is God allows Satan to do things to Job, and Job doesn't sin like his friends said. In other words, you're going through all these difficult times because you sinned. No, God allowed Satan to do this to prove the value of Job's faith. And so now, near the end of the book, God responds and talks to Job, and he says, can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades? Okay, there's that name again. Or loose the belt of Orion? There's that name again. Can you bring out the Mazzaroth in its season? Okay, the Mazzaroth, that's a Hebrew word. Some translations, like the NIV, probably say constellations. The Mazzaroth are like the zodiac, the 12 main zodiac that are around the earth. That's the Hebrew word for it, Mazzaroth. And then he goes on to say, or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? There's the bear again. So we've got Pleiades, Orion, and the bear. What are these things? Okay, there's the Pleiades, sometimes called the Seven Sisters. Okay, it's a cluster of stars that are very tight. If you look at the sky at night, at this time of year, do you recognize Orion? Do you? Okay, Orion, by the way, is pictured as a warrior. He's got a bow, and he's chasing after something that's east of him. The Pleiades. It's like Orion's after the Seven Sisters. So, but notice how they're very tightly grouped together. Okay? It's not a picture of the sky, but this gives you a diagram of Orion. Do you kind of recognize this? You see this recognizable three stars, and above and below and stuff. And there's kind of like stars that go down the side that look like a sword. Anyway, so he's a warrior. So he's chasing after, and somewhere, imagine, to the side, somewhere to the side are the Pleiades that he's chasing. Across the sky every night. He's chasing the Pleiades. Okay? And then here's a depiction of Ursa Major. And you're going, Ursa Major. That means the great bear. Now, we know part of this. Everyone who looks up at the sky at night, do you recognize the Big Dipper in it? The tail and the lower hind portion. You see the Big Dipper there? That's part of Ursa Major. But the Big Dipper is not technically a constellation. It's just a collection of stars that we recognize. So those are the ones that God mentions. And this is back 2500, 2300 BC. So over 4,000 years ago, God's talking about the stars. Important. Interesting. Okay? Now, it says that the heavens declare the glory of God. And here's Psalm 19:1. It says for us, David writes, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. The firmament is the atmosphere and the place where the stars live, shall we say, the space. Okay? It's like think of it like a vast net between the earth and where God is. There's this area of space. They often call it the three heavens. The heaven above our earth, the atmosphere where the birds live. Okay, that's the heaven. Then there's above that, outside the atmosphere where all the stars and the planets are. That's the second heaven. And the third heaven is where God lives, which is beyond our universe. Well, I mean, he's everywhere. So let's not draw straws there. Anyway, so glory. It's interesting, this word glory. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word glory is kavod. Okay? And in the New Testament, the Greek word is doxa. You ever sang the doxology? That's a word about God's glory. That's what that song is. So, kavod in the Old Testament, doxa in the New Testament. And so what is it talking about? Honor, splendor, dignity. Kind of think of it as reputation. You remember the Peanuts characters? There was one called Pigpen. Remember everywhere he went, he had this cloud of dust that followed him? That's kind of a negative. Think of that as a positive. Everywhere God goes, his cloud, his glory, his splendor, his reputation follows him wherever. You get it? That's what the word glory is. And God says he's not going to share that with anyone. So, including these false gods and these fallen angels and spiritual hosts of wickedness. Okay? Now, oops. Well, I didn't mean that to pop up. Okay, so let's talk about the immensity of space. It's pretty big. I don't know if you've noticed. It's pretty big. I mean, we deal with things called light years. You know, I think the distance from the sun to the earth, it takes 8 minutes for light to get here from the... So in other words, when you see the sunrise, it actually happened 8 minutes before that. And you're finally seeing it 8 minutes later or so, somewhere in there. 9 minutes, Ron? Okay. Okay, then the light is moving at, I think it's 186,000 miles a second. And do the math. If it takes 8 minutes, how many seconds are in 8 minutes? And how many, multiply that by 186,000 miles. And then you'll figure out how far the sun is away from us. That's pretty far, isn't it? 93 million miles, okay? So the universe is immense. We've been told by scientists that there are, now that we have good ways to view it, like the Hubble Space Telescope, and then there's a new one. I forget what it's called. Anyway, they're right outside of our atmosphere, so they're not obscured by our atmosphere, and they can see into deep space. So scientists are telling us now there's over 100 billion galaxies. 100 billion galaxies, the size of the Milky Way or bigger. And each of those galaxies contain 100 billion stars at least. Something wrong with the camera? I'm taller than, well, yeah, I am. This thing is cutting off my head. At least I'm not bleeding. That's the important thing. Okay, so does size matter? You know, people say size doesn't matter, or some people say the size matters. Of course, the people who say size doesn't matter are probably big and they don't care. But for, you know, little people, size matters. So, 100 billion galaxies. Hello? I hear you, God. 100 billion galaxies times 100 billion stars, at least. Could be 200 billion, 300 billion in the galaxies. Do the math. Look at those things. Those are just two. See all the lights around them? Not within the galaxy. That's going to be your stars. But apart from them, all of this out here, all these bright stars, these are not stars, these are galaxies. Okay? So do the math. Here's what it works out to. Anybody know how to pronounce that?
No.
A 1 followed by 22 zeros. 10 sextillion. You guys are familiar with hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions, like the United States is in debt, trillions. And it goes quadrillions, quintillions, and sextillions. By the way, I did the math, or actually my wife did the math. If you could count 1 second every, like a number, like 1, 2, 3, every second, You know how long it would take for you to get to 10 sextillion? And that's, of course, if you were awake all the time. You wouldn't be able to. It's 10 million years. Does anybody live that long? Natural human life? No. So yeah, I guess size does matter, huh? Yeah, that's if it's 200 billion, then it's going to be bigger than that. Okay, anyway, so what does God say in Isaiah 40, verse 26? He says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these things, who brings out their host by number. 10 sextillion or more, and he knows the names of every one of them." Does that impress you yet about God? I mean, he's unbelievable. He's infinite in his understanding. Okay? And it says he brings out their host by number. He calls them all by name. I don't know 10 sextillion of anything. And by the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one is missing. That's what God says in his word. In other words, they're not out of place. They're not shooting off somewhere and, well, it used to be over here, but I don't know where it is now. They're all where they're supposed to be. And he knows exactly where they're supposed to be. Okay? So, did you know that all those stars out there, they actively communicate to us? Did you know that? The stars are signs that God created. Okay? Some of you are probably familiar with this passage. Genesis chapter 1. This isn't the first chapter. God created the heavens and the earth, and then down to verse 14 and 15. And it says, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens." That's the expanse that, remember, around the earth, "to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and for years." There's things there that, in other words, the lights divide each day, and they are telling us messages, signs. They're dividing our seasons. They're dividing our days and our years. Did you know that? Okay. And he says, "And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth." And besides that, let's give light on the earth. And it was so. Wow. Okay. Now, we looked at it a minute ago. Psalm 19, I'm going to look at the first 4 verses, so 1 to 4. And I want you to look at the verbs that David uses to describe God's stars. Well, I guess first, this is David pitching for the Texas Rangers. No, I forgot that I put this in. This is telling us signs. What are signs? If you go to a baseball game, you know what a sign is, right? What is the pitcher looking for? He's squinting at the catcher for a reason. The catcher is doing this. He's going like 2, curveball? 1 fastball, 2 curveball, 3 slider, I don't know. Okay, of course now they have this electronic thing. They don't have to do this because people would steal these signs. Did you know if the opposing team, there's a guy at second, he's looking in there and he's doing something to try to tell the pitcher or the batter what's coming. Fastball, fastball. I don't know, fastball scratching his ear or something, whatever he did. Okay, or about this one. It's like the third base coach. What is he doing? He's telling them what to do. So signs are important. And there are signs everywhere. And the stars are just one kind of sign. Obviously, I didn't give you all the stop signs and the traffic lights and all that. Those are signs too. What are they doing? They're telling you what to do. So the stars are communicating to us. Okay? Here's Psalm 19. This is the verbs. Look at this. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech. Night after night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words, of course, this is a parallel. So their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words have gone out through all the end of the world. I don't know why that's doing that. So in them, he has set a tabernacle for the sun. So that's what? 6 verbs. Let's look at them. Psalm 19, 1 to 4. Here are the verbs in 6 different verbs that he uses. So in Hebrew. So when David writes this, he communicates in each of those verses. He gives us a different verb. Verbs are important if you haven't noticed in our language. So Safar, Nagad, Nabah, Chava, Shema, and Yatzah. Okay, they sound like a... Anyway, they're all... Okay, you're going, so who cares? Well, this is what these verbs mean. Declare, tell, number, count, show forth, speak, recount, relate, utter, expound, report, announce, send forth. Here's a good one. Belch out, flow, or gush forth, or emit. So do you see what he's doing here? All these verbs somehow all are the same kind of thing. I didn't match every single one with, because they're all basically saying the same thing, but all different verbs. So why does David do that? Because he wants us to know that the stars are talking to us. Okay? And what does the Bible say in Romans 10? Paul's writing the book of Romans, and he says, so then, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But I say, he's talking about his Jewish people. If you know the book of Romans, he's talking about, did God forget the Jews? Are they neglected? No. But did they know that the time for Jesus had come? Yes. And notice what he quotes. He says, have they not heard? And he says, yes, indeed, they heard. And then he quotes Psalm 19. Their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. In other words, David told us 1,000 years before about the heavens and that they're communicating to us. And so they knew that the time of Jesus, the time of the Messiah was right because they saw it in the sky. Okay, you don't make that argument unless it really happened and they can understand. So the Jews have no excuse. Because God said, look, it's the signs that I gave you, follow them, and they're going to lead you to this. I mean, there were other things that came along, like where he was going to be born and stuff. But when the certain signs were there, it told them when he would be born. And we're going to explore that. So if you haven't already strapped in, go ahead and do so. Okay? So, that's the signs in the sky. What about the seekers from the east? This is where they came from. We call them Magi, wise men. They're not kings. Okay? So I think we need to talk about the myths about them. They're not kings. These are traditions. I was trying to find out where the tradition started. I don't know. Traditions are one of those weird things that kind of like slowly pick up steam. Someone puts this in there, someone puts that there, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger as they go along until, hey, well, this is something we've always done. No, it started somewhere, good or bad. Okay, so they were not kings. They were astronomers. They were people who were studying the stars in Persia. Okay, they worked for, like, Nebuchadnezzar. You guys are familiar with that name, that big long name, Nebuchadnezzar. If you read in the book of Daniel, his name is all over the place. But he was a ruler in Babylon, the king of Babylon, and he had advisors, counselors, and people who he surrounded himself with. So in chapter 2 of Daniel, when he has a weird dream, he asks all the wise men to come and tell me what my dream was and what it means. They couldn't tell him because, for one, they didn't know what he dreamed. But Daniel, so he started killing them because they didn't know. And so Daniel, who was taken in captivity sometime before and was being taught the Babylonian system, he says, wait. I know a God who can reveal this. Give me a second and I will tell you. And he does. So guess what? Daniel is rewarded. He is given, basically, and well, we're going to get to this in a minute, because it's the school that they came from. So anyway, they were astronomers, counselors, wise men. They were when something happened, well, these guys are threatening our border, tell me what I need to do. Well, this says, let's, some of them, of course, were false, and they would take, like, the liver of a donkey or something, and they would say, well, this says that you're going to win the battle. Some of them were pretty funky. But there were people who were actually studying the stars, because the stars, by the way, every night you look at the stars, they're almost all exactly the same. I mean, aside from the sun and the moon, there are only 5 that don't fit in the fixed field of stars. It goes by and it's the same every night. So if you have no light pollution and you can see it every night, you watch the stars, if you're out at night. Many of them slept on their roofs of their houses when it was warm, so they saw the stars all the time. And so they were very intimately familiar with them, and they traveled by them, telling them which way is north and which way is, whatever, I need to go this way. So they knew the stars, okay? But these wise men were basically, some of them were astrologers and some of them were astronomers. Because there's a lot of groups. There's like, when you read the book of Daniel, it talks about the Chaldeans and the wise men and the counselors and the astrologers, and it's got all these different groups. So another thing, there were probably not 3 of them. We associate 3 because there are 3 gifts mentioned: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So, well, there must have been 3 of them. One each had gold, one had frankincense, and one had myrrh. Okay? And has anybody ever heard their names by tradition? Melchior, Gaspar, Balthazar. Who came up with those names? The Bible doesn't tell us who they are. They just say wise men. So that's a myth. Lots of things are myths. Okay? So the Bible doesn't give them names. And like I say, there were more than 3 of them, I'm sure. Okay? Now, they were part of what we call the Eastern School, meaning in the East, in Persia. Came up at the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel was one of his young advisors. And because of Daniel's vision and being able to tell him, he was put in charge. Look at this in Daniel chapter 2, verse 46 to 48. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. In other words, Daniel told him not only his dream, which he didn't reveal, and what it meant. And so he's saying, he falls on his face before Daniel and says, hey, you are, whoever you're communicating, that your God is truly the God of gods. Notice verse 47. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. And now, verse 48, then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler or authority over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the what? Wise men of Babylon. So Daniel is promoted, and now he's not worshiping the stars. He's not an astrologer, but he could teach them what the stars mean. They all have meaning. The constellations have meaning. I did a series, or I have done a series, didn't finish it because it's really long, in Sunday school, or 9 o'clock hour, called Written in the Stars, where we go through and we look at the constellations, because the constellations tell the gospel story. That's very fascinating if you've never studied that. Okay? Right now we're contending for the faith. So someday, if we're not raptured beforehand, we'll continue that. There's just a lot in it. And so it seemed like it was about a year, and I wanted I want to do something else for a little while. So we did. Okay? So this Eastern school, this is going to come into play just in a moment. This whole idea of this Eastern school, because there were, in ancient history, there were 2 well-known schools of astronomers, astrologers, counselors, Chaldeans, prognosticators, whatever you want to call them. One of them was called the Eastern School, and there was a guy, you may have heard of him, he wrote a lot. He was a kind of a Jewish, not sure if he was a believer, but I think he recorded the fact that there was a good school, was the Eastern School. where they studied the natural order of things. And so I think the wise men who come are descendants of Daniel. They're either descendants of Daniel or they are learned from Daniel, and they have this understanding and what the stars were signifying. Okay? So they were probably aware of biblical prophecies like this one, where they're told Judah is a lion's whelp, cub, offspring. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. Judah is one of the 12 tribes, and Judah's symbol is a lion. You may have heard of the expression lion of the tribe of Judah, describing Jesus. Okay, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and Jesus is Shiloh, by the way. And to him shall be the obedience of the people. Okay, so Genesis 49, this is the blessing given by the old patriarch, Jacob, whose name was changed by God to Israel, which means strives or struggles or wrestles with God. That's what Israel means. Okay, and so he blessed all his children, his 12 sons, and this is what he said about Judah. So from him, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. This is how we know that Judah, of the 12 tribes, Judah is the line that the king or the prince would come from. Because the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Okay, so they probably knew this. They were aware of Jewish things, these wise men that studied under Daniel's teaching. And there is a picture of a lion, beautiful lion. This is a white lion, by the way. Yeah, if you've read Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan, he was described as a lion. Okay, here's another one they probably knew from the book of Numbers. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes. Okay, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. So he's referring to someone coming out of the tribe of Judah from Jacob, who is going to be a star. Okay? Got to keep that in mind, a star. So he shall rise out of Israel and batter the brow of Moab and destroy all the sons of Tumult. Okay? So, talking about a lion and a star, this is going to come into play here shortly. I promise. Now, in the passage that we've read earlier, Matthew chapter 2, Matthew records for us 9 characteristics of the star. The star I'm talking about is the Star of Bethlehem. What was it? Okay? So we're gonna look at it. What was the star? Okay? And so Matthew gives us 9 things to look for. Okay, here's verse 1 and 2. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. Okay, so there's 4 clues right there. You guys figure them out? If not, let me tell you. One of the things they saw of the star indicated there was a birth. Okay? He's been born. Okay? One of them, another clue was that this particular one who's born would be a king. Okay? And of course, another one is that he's going to come from Jewish descent. It's going to concern the Jewish people. If I'm going too fast, let me know. Some of you might want to fill in some of these blanks. Okay, and number 4, the star rose in the east. And you're going, okay, well, all the stars rise in the east. Well, not all. What about the North Star? Does it rise in the east? No, it's the pole star. And there's other stars that are in that area. You don't come up over the horizon. So this is a clue that they saw it. Yes, they were in the east, and we saw the star while we were in the east, but that's not what it's saying in the Greek. The Greek there says that it was rising in the east, meaning that it was like a normal star. It rose over the horizon, and we could see it. It's I think the expression is in Anatolia, or something of that nature. It has to do with it rose in the east. We could see it rising over the horizon, and then we could see what it was doing, and then we could follow it. That's what they were saying. So there's 4 of the 9 characteristics. Indicated a birth, a kingship, had to do with the Jewish people, and it rose in the east, like a normal star. Okay? Matthew chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. When Herod the king heard this, when they came and they told him, guess what? He got a little perturbed, a little disturbed, troubled. So when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. There's a clue there, but we'll come back to it in a later verse. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Herod didn't know. Okay? So keep that in mind. We're going to get the clues in a minute. Now, Matthew 2, 5-6. So they said to him, and they quote out of the Old Testament, out of the book of Micah, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet Micah, they don't list it by him by name, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler. Remember the one who's got the scepter? Who will shepherd my people Israel. So they knew that a king was born. They probably didn't know themselves where Bethlehem was. Because when they came, where did they go? They went to Jerusalem. They didn't know where Bethlehem was. And then they had to be pointed. Oh, well, it's just down 5 miles south on the main road. There's Bethlehem. You can see it from here. Okay? So, now going on, verse 7 and 8. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, so they came to the court, they said these things, he was kind of disturbed, and all his court were disturbed by what they were being told. And so he called them privately later. Tell me, what time did the star appear? I want to know some details here. And then, of course, after the wise men, or the priests and the scribes had come in and told them Bethlehem, so he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child. And when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. We know that he didn't want to come. He was a very jealous king. If you don't know anything about King Herod, he had one of his own sons, and I think his wife, killed because he thought they were plotting to take his throne. He had these fortresses that he built, kind of like south part of Jerusalem, and then further down. Some of you may have heard of Masada. On the northern face of Masada, he built what's called the Hanging Palace. It's like a 3-level palace, thinking that, hey, if I get somebody who's after me, I can retreat to first thing, it's called the Herodian, where he took the top of a mountain and just cut it off and built down inside it. And I can retreat there. If I have to go further, I can go to Masada and hold up there. So he was very jealous. So the idea that he was going to come and worship, he's going to worship with a sword. Okay, so there are some clues there. Obviously, he had to call them and ask them about the fact that what specific time did it show up. He didn't know. He didn't see it. That's another clue. Herod and all those that were in his court did not see or recognize the sign. It wasn't some miraculous just vision, because they would have known. They would have seen it. Remember, they knew the night sky intimately. Okay? Going on, verses 9 and 10. When they heard the king, they departed, the wise men. And behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them. So when they came from Persia, they were looking west to Jerusalem, and the star went right in front of them. Okay? When they got to Bethlehem, or to Jerusalem, then they looked south, and guess what? Looking straight south to Bethlehem, there was the star. So it led them, and it stopped over. Okay, that sounds unusual for a star, but we're going to talk about that. So when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. So first of all, they saw it in the east, and when they got there, I don't know how many months it took, maybe 4, 5, 6 months to get 700 miles on a camel. They didn't have freeways back then, so they, took them a while. When they got there, so after months, the star was still visible, meaning it wasn't something, we'll talk about what it wasn't here in a second. Okay, it endured over a long period of time. Okay, it also went ahead of them as they traveled, so it was traveling from east to west as they traveled, and then it stopped over Bethlehem. It's like, what happened there? So those are your 9 clues. So we're going to examine now the various possibilities. And many people have tried to discover what the Star of Bethlehem was throughout time. What's that? Many people have tried to discover, including some very famous people. Kepler, Newton, and those people have tried to understand, well, where was the star and when did it appear? So a lot of people have been looking. So what we need to do, let me throw in verse 11 because it finishes our passage. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented him with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, the word, by the way, child. Jesus was not an infant when they came. He was a child. It's a different word in Greek. Okay, he's not a babe like when the shepherds come. And they're no longer in a stable, they're in a house. This is sometime later. Okay, and so, and that's why does Herod go and send the soldiers out to kill babies that are 2 years of age and under? Why? Because that's the time frame. It was probably about a year, but he wanted to be able to make sure he got all of them. Yeah. That's a good one. Dead sure. Okay, so we need to look at what we call the starry dance. And yes, this is coming to a close, I promise. But I hope this is keeping you on the edge of your seat. This is really interesting stuff. Okay, so many have tried to identify the star throughout history. And just about everything that's in the sky has been proposed by someone at some time. For example, it was, because it didn't exhibit any spectacular manifestations, it was not a shooting star. Because remember, one of the clues is it endured. They saw it, and then months later they still saw it. Couldn't have been a shooting star. Gone. 1, 2 seconds. Couldn't have been a shooting star. Okay? It wasn't a comet. Because a lot of people thought, it was a comet. Like Halley's Comet or Halley's Comet or whatever the correct pronunciation is. I've heard both. Comets are beautiful. They get the long tail as they get closer to the sun that, throws off all that dust and ice and stuff that's melting. But comets everyone would have seen. And there's no discussion of comets at all in the ancient times of this. And comets were universally thought of as an omen of doom. When you saw a comet, you ran. Look at the cave paintings. Every time they see a comet, all these people are going, and they're freaking out and they're running. So would God announce the birth of his son with an omen of doom? I don't think so. Besides, it doesn't fit. Okay? What about a supernova? An exploding star? Because it would endure over time. But everybody would have seen it. It would have been different. And it's like, have you seen that weird thing out there, that's now in the night sky and, this quadrant or this constellation that I've never seen before? Everyone would have been talking about it. No. So it was none of any of those things. And the records don't show any comets or nova. I guess plural of nova is novae or something like that. I don't read Latin. So anyway, so none of those appear in the records. So it had to be something normal, something natural that's always there. Because notice, remember, the king Herod and his others, they didn't see it. If it was something spectacular or even a temporary manifestation of God, a miracle of God that just was there and then it was gone, don't you think they would have seen it? They didn't. It had to have been something that was already there, that they saw every day. They just didn't understand what it was telling them. Remember, the stars communicate. Okay? All right. So it had to have been a normal astronomical event, meaning a normal body of out there that was not doing anything weird. It just did what it was supposed to do. Okay? So, which leaves us with one possibility. It's one of the 5 wandering stars. Does everybody understand that term, wandering star? I mean, yes, aside from the movie quote I was talking about earlier, Born Under a Wandering Star. The fixed stars, in other words, when you look out and you see the constellations, every night they're the same. There are 7 bodies that we can see from Earth that are different, and they move around. One is the sun, one is the moon. Okay, that leaves 5. These 5 wandering stars are actually planets in our solar system. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. We don't see Earth from Earth. We're on Earth. But these stars, they called them stars, but they moved around. In other words, sometimes they were here in this constellation, and sometimes they were in that constellation. They moved around. And they thought they were just wandering stars. They didn't understand the concept of planets, which is what we do now. We understand they're planets. So, most likely what was happening, one of these wandering stars, or more than one of these wandering stars, was involved. Okay? You follow me? Okay. So, the lack of technology kept people from discovering it. Many people that tried to plot it, and even the people that kind of had a basic understanding, like Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler, you may have heard some of these names, they tried to figure out where it was, but they didn't have the right knowledge, and they didn't have a computer. Today, the computer is really helpful because you can do a lot of math. You can do the math right, but imagine how many pages it might take you to figure it out and draw it on a piece of paper, what the sky looked like at any given moment on any given day. It would take you lots of paper and ink to kind of do that. Or take one whole wall in your house and do the math and chart and all that stuff. So they couldn't. Okay? So it had to have been a lack of technology. They didn't have the ability. Besides that, there weren't any cameras. David and Moses and those people, they didn't have cameras to record exactly and show us a snapshot of what it would look like. So no one could figure out for sure what things were doing at any time in history unless you spent a lot of time cranking the numbers. Right? And that kind of didn't happen until like the middle of the 1500s, early 1600s, when you had people like Copernicus. You may have heard of his name. I think it was Nicolaus Copernicus. He got into trouble because he promoted something called the heliocentric orbit. Well, heliocentric means that he said the solar system, because until then, the church told people, hey, the earth is the center. Everything revolves around the earth. And so when he said, no, the sun is the center, and everything revolves around the sun, they went, no, stone him, burn him alive, because he was going against what the church taught. So he wasn't a nice guy. But he thought that the planets moved around in a perfectly circular orbit. Not quite. They're close. They're elliptical. And it was a guy who followed him, Johannes Kepler, who had access to records, meticulous records that were kept by his guy named Tycho Brahe, who kept all these records. And so he could see that Copernicus was wrong. They weren't circular, they were elliptical. And suddenly he saw the whole thing and it worked out, and he developed the math. He published what they call the 3 laws of planetary motion. They're still used today by NASA and people like that. Because basically the universe is like a big clock. If you just know exactly, their movements, you can plot where everything was when it was. Okay? So it was, so the celestial mechanics were finally unlocked thanks to starting with Copernicus and then Kepler. And Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion, that's what we know why they move. Okay, what does all this mean? Well, what did the Magi actually see? What, or as I said, what the Magi actually saw. Past tense. First thing is they noted the kingly connection. Kingly, meaning had to do with a king. It was connected to a king or the thought of a king. So they saw the king planet. Of the 5 wandering stars, which one is the king planet? The biggest planet in our system. It was named for the king of the gods, Jupiter. Here it is. And one of its moons with a shadow on it. Beautiful. It's huge and it's way out there. Okay, so they noted that this particular wandering star was associated with kings. Okay, which is why the Romans called it Jupiter, name of the king of the gods. Okay, now it's the biggest planet. It's named for the king of the gods. Okay, so they noted, okay, there's a king planet. They didn't know, they called it the king wandering star probably. They didn't know it was a planet. Then there's a king star. A fixed star in the field of stars is also associated with kings. Okay, this is Regulus. Regulus. From the word Regulus, we get regal. The Romans called it Rex. You ever heard of Tyrannosaurus Rex? And the Babylonians called it Sheru. All 3 of those mean king. So this particular star, fixed star, means king. It's associated with kings. So you have this wandering star that's associated with kings, and you have this fixed star that's associated with kings. Okay? And then they also noted there's a constellation in the sky, one of the 12, that's associated with kings. And based on what we read a little while ago, you might remember in Genesis 49, Jacob says, who is the lion's whelp? Well, Judah. And what is the sign of Judah? Leo. Leo the lion. Okay? Here's a representation of, with an artistic drawing, there's Leo. Behind Leo, coming behind him is Virgo. Okay, obviously in front of him is Cancer. We don't care about him. But in the constellation, notice near one of his front legs, there is a star. I don't know if you can see it if it's too small. It's called Regulus. It's in the constellation of Leo. There it is. You see it? Okay, close to the heart, and it's like, like in his leg or whatever, or his forepaw. Okay, so Jupiter, okay, Regulus, and Leo. Those are all really important. The lion, okay? So they saw the Lion of Judah, okay? So let's now talk about the courtly rendezvous. I tell you folks, I am drawing to a close here, but I'm going to show you some things here pictorially that I hope will blow your socks off. It did when I saw it. I didn't come up with this. I was introduced to this. There's a lawyer, there's the video, if you've never seen it, called The Star of Bethlehem, by a lawyer named Rick Larson. He's not an astronomer, but he was fascinated by it, and he's discovered this some years ago, and is basically, it just, like I say, it's amazing. So let me tell you, in August and September-ish of 3 BC, and remember, BC, we say before Christ, hence the name BC. Those who don't believe in Jesus, like Jews and other people, they say BCE. Sometimes you'll see BCE, before the Common Era. And then, of course, we say AD, from the Latin Anno Domini, which means year of the Lord. But a lot of people say, well, it means after death. So they say CE, Common Era. So there's the Common Era that we live in now, 2024, coming to an end of the Common Era. And you have before the Common Era, before that. So in August, September of 3 BC, Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, wandering star, entered the constellation of Leo. In other words, Leo was moving, and Jupiter's doing its thing, and then suddenly here comes Jupiter toward Leo in 3 BC. And this is what they saw. Okay, you see the little circle, there comes Jupiter, now coming toward Leo and coming toward Regulus. Okay? So at the same time that this was happening in August and September of 3 BC, something was happening close to Virgo that was exactly the vision that John saw in Revelation chapter 12. Revelation 12. Okay? Here's what he wrote. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head, jewels on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, like a scepter. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Now, not all of this applies, like the third of the stars and stuff, that applies to Satan. And the dragon, of course, is Satan. But Satan stood before the woman, and of course here most people say that this is Mary. The woman is Israel. Because later on after this verse it talks about the woman fleeing in the desert. Well, Mary didn't do that. It's talking about the nation of Israel. So Jesus was born to the nation of Israel. Yes, it was through Mary. And yes, Satan was there trying to kill Jesus when he was born. Who did that take? Who personified that, humanly speaking? King Herod. Herod acted like the dragon or in league with the dragon to try to kill him. Okay, so that was happening at the same time. In other words, this is what they saw. Okay, you see Leo, okay, Regulus, and then you see Virgo. And she's clothed with the sun, meaning as the constellation rose over the horizon, the sun was behind her. That's what clothed with the sun means. She's like taking it on as a garment. And you'll notice, you see down here, here's the moon. At her feet. This is what they saw. They saw what was going on. Here comes Jupiter toward Regulus, and at the same time they're seeing this. So Revelation chapter 12. So they're going, of course, they don't know Revelation yet at that point, but we do. So they saw this. So they didn't quite understand that, but anyway, pretty wild. So could that have been, that picture, the point of conception, when Jesus was actually conceived in Mary? When you see the woman clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet and Jupiter approaching next door Leo. Could that have been when he was conceived? Yeah, possible. We don't know for sure. So, what happens though is Jupiter has what we call a very unusual triple conjunction with Regulus. And guess what? It's over a 9-month period. Is that kind of surprising? So let's look at it. So here's a diagram. You see Leo. You see Regulus, right? You see Regulus? This arrow pointing to Regulus is right here. Okay? And this is going to be the flight path of Jupiter. Let's watch what Jupiter does. So there's Regulus. Here comes Jupiter, like August 1 of 3 BC. And then, every night you see it as it's slowly moving. In September, a month later, it's definitely coming in conjunction with Regulus. Okay? And then it passes Regulus, October 1st, keeps going, November 1st, November 29th, January 1st of now 2 BC, because 3 BC becomes 2 BC, because remember they're counting backwards. Of course, they didn't do this. This is us doing it looking back. They didn't go, oh, it's changing, in the new year, 2 BC. They didn't have that way of keeping track. So January of 2 BC, March of 2 BC, the end of March of 2 BC, and guess what? Then June of 2 BC and 1. Now, what has happened? Regulus is here. Jupiter comes along and has a close conjunction. And then it changes its mind and goes back around. And then it changes its mind again and goes again. Do you see what it just did? It made a halo over the top of Regulus. It crowned Regulus. You had the king planet and the king star in the king's constellation. Does that not show you king, king, and king? And this is what they saw in the sky. It took place over 9 months. Okay? And so, and then, like I say, and then they saw, went the wrong way. It continues, and it goes toward Virgo. And Virgo, by the way, if you're not familiar with the Latin, what does Virgo mean? Virgin. Who is the virgin? That she would conceive and bear a son. So you have Leo, the constellation of Christ, the king, the Lion of Judah, which has the star Regulus, and you have Jupiter crowning it, and then moving on toward the mother. Because there's another conjunction coming up. So this is very, 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 very rare, by the way, this triple conjunction. Jupiter goes along. It takes 12 years to get around. So every 12 years you'll see it kind of come through in certain ways. And it does this loop-de-loop. And it keeps going. Huh? It's called retrograde motion. Now, what does that mean? That means that as the Earth, because we're viewing this from a moving platform. So as we move, Jupiter's moving. And so sometimes when we're on one side of it or the other side of it, it seems to go forward or backwards. Retrograde motion. Okay? So as it goes, guess what? It moves toward Virgo. And it has created, at this point, the brightest star that anyone had ever seen. What happened? In June of 2 BC, after its 9 months, crowning, triple conjunction, crowning Regulus, Jupiter moves toward Virgo, and guess what? Venus comes along, and they come into conjunction. Here you have the mother giving birth to the son in or near the constellation of Virgo. There's Jupiter and Venus. Nope. Jupiter, the big one, and then Venus, the smaller one. But when you see them in the sky, guess what? Venus looks bigger because it's closer. Well, it's closer. It's bright. Well, that's because it's reflected light. It's brighter. Here's a little diagram. I don't know if you can really see it. Here's the Earth, and then you can see, which is here. And then you have, this is Venus, which is inside of us. But as we look past Venus out to Jupiter, so you see Jupiter and Venus appear to come together in the sky. Does that make sense? Does everybody follow? So this happened. This is a picture from 2023. It happened. It was very close. It wasn't as close, but it was very close. Venus and Jupiter, and of course Venus, notice it's bigger looking because it's closer. Jupiter is farther away. But Venus is the brightest star or thing that we'll see from our planet, not counting the sun. It's the brightest object in the sky. It's considered the mother star, the mother planet. Jupiter's the king planet. So when they come close together, mother gives birth to the king, to a king. Okay? So here's another one. Again, this was close. Jupiter and Venus come together. And when it happened, and this is from 2023, so this is some 2,000 years later, what happened is they came, as their movement brought them so close together, they looked like they were touching. You couldn't see with the naked eye any distance between them. And so they stacked light upon each other. So Venus, which is already the brightest object that we can see with the naked eye, and Jupiter come together and form, for a time, the brightest star that anyone had ever seen. Okay? Like I say, this is from 2023. So this is not even, they were even closer than this. Okay? So, and the event lasted probably for about 3 days as they came real close, and then they kind of almost superimposed, and then a little bit, so about 3 days, this really bright star. And that's what the Magi saw. They saw all of this, and they all connected it with the Jewishness, the kingship, going to Israel, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Regulus, Jupiter, all this stuff. It was fascinating. And we got to go. This never happens in, like every 12 years Jupiter comes around and has conjunctions, but not like this. Something is special happening. So God, who put the stars in there at creation, put them in such a way that when the time was right, this message would be sent to the people. And they followed, and they came. And of course, we today are benefits of what happened, because we follow the Son, not the S-U-N, the S-O-N. So the Magi saw this, and they came. They had to come. Once in a lifetime experience. Matter of fact, once every 2,000 years probably, or unbelievable. So here they came. That's all I've got for you. And hopefully you're impressed with God putting things in the right place thousands of years before He wanted this message sent. Because He didn't alter them. They're still doing the same thing this many years later. 6,000 years later, and they're still like a big clock.